When I was not much older than all of you, I went to graduate school at Cranbrook Academy of Art in Michigan. And Cranbrook is a most unusual school in that there are only 150 students there at a time. And the entire school, the buildings, the furniture, the silverware in the cafeteria, the light fixtures, everything was designed by Eliel Saarinen and his wife. So you go to school in this fabulous environment, surrounded by fantastic architecture, and you make art. And that's all you do for 2 years. So I had a fabulous first year there. I was making sculpture out of rope and twine and bricks and wood and things, and I had a great time. And when I came back for my second year, I decided I hated everything I had made the first year. It seemed meaningless and ridiculous to me. And I had no idea what I was going to make next. So I sat in my studio for a couple months and read books and looked at art magazines. And I thought about quitting school because I was wasting a huge amount of money and time being there. But my teacher kept saying, don't give up. This is going to work out. So here's a shot of Cranbrook. And here's another. This is the house that the president lives in. So while I was reading all these books, I started reading poetry, and I picked up this little book by Frank O'Hara called Lunch Poems. Frank O'Hara was the curator of painting at MoMA in New York, and he was also a poet. And one of the things he did every day during his lunch break from MoMA is he'd walk around Midtown Manhattan and write poems. And they were published in this little book. And it was quite controversial at the time in the 50s when he wrote this, because all he wrote about was what he did every day. Not about the artwork in the museum, but about the friends he met, the parties he went to, what he had for lunch, just the minutiae of everyday life. And that struck me as really fascinating. So I was thinking about how I could incorporate that into my work, whatever that work was going to be. But I had a little problem. At Cranbrook, there is nothing going on in your life except making art. We didn't go out for lunch. We didn't go to movies. We didn't go to parties. All we did 24 hours a day was make art. So I had to figure out what I was going to write about. So the first piece that I made when I was coming out of this long period when I couldn't figure out what to do was a stack of cards. I found this spoon in the cafeteria, which was one of the original Saarinen spoons, and photographed it, and then screen printed it onto fabric and made it stiff with some matte medium and put it in a typewriter and typed on it. And then I took those little pieces of fabric that I had typed on and mounted them on boards, like book boards, and made this stack of cards. So there are about 30 of these. And I just picked out 4 of them. And they were just about things that were happening in my daily life, in my little world at Cranbrook. So this one, today I am dressed completely in navy blue. That, when you're not doing much of anything else, that's significant. If you walk around with a tape measure hanging around your neck, is that indicative of something? I was in the fiber department, and we all walked around with tape measures around our necks. So this was the beginning of something special. I wasn't sure where I was going to go with it or what was going to happen, but I knew I'd gotten past that terrible creative block that I'd been in, and I was happy to be back at school, and I was happy to keep working. So this evolved into all kinds of different things. I was making sculpture with writing on it. I made these little fabric teacups with writing on them. And now we fast forward many, many years to my studio in Brooklyn a couple weeks ago. So this is just a little shot of a painting called Seesaw, and fabulous light coming through the window to show you that there is life after school. So the first series of paintings I'm going to show you are very recent. They were just shot last week. I have a professional photographer shoot all my work because I quickly realized there's a skill to photographing artwork beyond anything I'm capable of doing. Even though I'm computer savvy, I can't shoot as well as this person shoots. So it's just something to think about if you're applying for graduate school and looking for galleries. Don't shoot your own artwork. Have somebody who really knows what they're doing do it for you. So I became interested in using art and language because I realized there were two fields in the art world that have many, many similarities. Artwork you look at, and words you write, and you hear, and you read, but you look at them also. They're images on a surface just like painting and drawing is. And they, yes?
What's the scale of that piece?
This is about 2 feet in its longest dimension. And you can see it's a constructed canvas. There's a hole in the middle. So this is just a stretcher with canvas on it. But I built the stretcher so there's an empty space in the middle, and I stretched the canvas around that hole. I became very interested in making paintings that are not just rectangles because I'm interested in the object of the painting, so that when you look at the painting, it's not just a flat surface, it's a thing that hangs on the wall, and it's got depth. So this is about 2 inches thick, but some of them are deeper. They're 4 inches thick, some are 5 inches thick, because I want it to look like an object hanging on the wall. But beyond that, this says, let me draw you a picture, which works in 2 dimensions here. That's something you say when you want to tell someone a story about something. It's a really common phrase. And it doesn't mean literally, I'm going to draw you a picture. It means you're going to describe a situation or an incident that happened. But it also means very literally, I'm going to draw you a picture. So that's where these 2 fields of art and language come together. And I'm fascinated with that melding of the 2 arts. Just listen to this. So this has to do with storytelling. So there are paintings that tell stories, and there are words that tell stories, and they both can do the same thing using different media. I've been meaning to write you. People write a lot now, a lot more than they used to, since we use our phones to text, much more than we make phone calls. So writing has become such an important means of communication. But there's something intentional about it. It doesn't just happen. You have to pick up your phone and start punching those buttons. And doing that, you communicate with somebody else who you want to connect with. So this is about that same thing, making that meaningful connection to someone else. So I started thinking about, as I'm making art, who's your audience and how do you connect with them? Lots of artists make artwork that's very inward focused. They want to make these things, they sit on the floor, they hang on the wall, or they're in whatever environment they pick, but they're not actually addressing the audience. So that was something I became interested in, because with writing, you're addressing the audience of your readers. With painting, you can address the audience of your viewers. So I wanted to make that back and forth connection so I'm directly addressing the people who are looking at my work. So show and tell is a thing grade school kids do when they get up in front of the class and say like what they did over their summer vacation. And they bring a little object or a picture to illustrate. But when you think about it, this is something we do all the time as artists. We show what we're making and we talk about it. But I make this a little more direct than that. It's sort of confrontational because it's in your face. Show me and tell me, like a demand. And this is a constructed painting that sits at a right angle. It's two paintings, two canvases that come together. So it sits in the corner of a room, and it wouldn't work anywhere else except in a corner. And I discovered when I first hung it up, finished in my studio, that as you walk around the room, it kind of follows you everywhere because it's got two different sides. And the letters are painted in silver paint, so they kind of shimmer. So as you walk around the room, this thing sort of glows at you, and it's constantly reminding you to show and to tell. Now, show and tell is also something that writers talk about all the time. People who write fiction discuss if they're describing a character, suppose you're describing a man who's a very angry, unhappy person. Do you tell your reader that this is an angry, unhappy man? Or do you show that he's angry and unhappy through the things that he does in the story that you're telling? Some writers say you should do one, some the other. Others say it needs to be a combination of both. So it's an interesting thing to think about when you're painting or drawing or making art, is how overt do you have to be about the message you're trying to get across? Do you make it really overt and tell your audience what it is you want to say? Or do you show them what you want to say? And it's a decision you have to make. And as you look at other people's artwork, you'll see artists who do both things, and they can be equally effective. So this is a painting that just presents those two possibilities. What more can I tell you? This painting is built the opposite way. It fits around a corner in a room. So you don't always see both sides at once. If you just happen to be like at this side, you see the part that says what can tell. And if you walk to the other side, you see more IU. And you have to stand in front of it to see both sides. So it's just presenting the question of, is there more? And have I left anything out? Which is a question artists have to ask themselves all the time. Have I made this idea complete, or is there something more I need to do to get my ideas across more clearly or more fully? And if you decide you haven't completed what it is you need to say, you need to do more work. So this is something parents say to kids all the time: watch what you say. But it's also something artists do all the time, because there's the visual, the watching, and the saying, the telling. So when you think about it, this is what making art is all about. It's watching and saying. And you have to be cognizant of what you're watching and saying all the time so that your artwork is intentional. It's what you want it to be. It isn't just an accident that happened because you only had red paint one day and you didn't have time to get to the store to buy any other colors. Everything that you do, everything that you make should be who you are, where you come from, and with intent. So I was just thinking about what would it be like if this was in someone's house like in their living room, and it says, "Watch what you say," all the time in someone's house. It's a little aggressive, but it's also kind of a nice reminder that everything that you say is important, and you treat people in your home with kindness because you don't say things you wish you hadn't. So it's a little subtle thing that I could picture this in someone's living room could be really effective in bringing family harmony. And here it is with a stool so you can get some idea of the scale. It's not very big. It's only about 14 inches high. And I used really deep wood, so that's about a 3-inch thick stretcher. And when I made this, I put the two parts of the stretcher together, and then I stretched the canvas over it. And I didn't realize as I pulled it tight that the canvas was going to curve so nicely. And then when I wet the canvas before I put gesso on it, it pulled really tight. So it made this, it was a much nicer curve than I was ever expecting it to make. And it means that unlike the painting that goes around the corner that you have to stand in front of to see both sides of, when it's inside the corner like this, you can really see it from anywhere. And also, I think a lot about, even though most of my work is white, I think a whole lot about the colors. And there are many, many layers of paint underneath this white paint. There's blue and turquoise, and I think there's a layer of yellow under there. Because over time, since this is oil paint, all those subtle colors are going to come through. And although it's not going to ever look like a blue painting, it's going to look like a white painting with sort of a blue glow because there's so much blue and turquoise under there. And little bits of the blue show through in the front. So that was a very conscious decision to make something as subtle as possible, but filled with depth. And then I made the letters silver because I was doing something very confrontational, and I wanted to make it a little gentler and more decorative. So there's this contrast between the confrontational, watch what you say, and the polite, silver-like jewelry. So that's how I ended up, so that everything that you see here is intentional. There aren't ever any accidents, which is sort of the opposite of how somebody like Jackson Pollock worked. He embraced that notion of accident, even though he had total control over what he was doing. He was so skilled at throwing paint that he knew how to embrace that notion of accident. I'm much more precise than that. So this is the series that I did just before the ones I showed you. These are made with chalkboard paint, really, really flat acrylic paint that's this fabulous shade of dark gray. And the drawing on there is real chalk. And this horizontal piece, this thing, is actually a shelf. It's about 6 inches deep, so that the parts on top sit on top of it and go around it. So what I was trying to do was construct physical sentences that worked just like a grammatically correct sentence, so that all the parts of the sentence are interconnected and dependent on each other, both conceptually and physically. They have to work together or the piece falls apart, just like a good sentence has to work together or the meaning falls apart. If any of you have questions in the middle, just interrupt me, okay? So this is another shelf right here. And you can see, if you look right there, you can see how deep it is. So these two, the parts that say "see what" sit on top of the shelf. And they need that shelf. They need the part that says "I mean" in order to sit up there. Without the I mean part, the other two parts would fall on the floor. But it's also about the notion of meaning, concept, and seeing, the visual and the artwork. Oh, I bet got in there twice.
It was a good shot.
Oh, I know why this is here twice. I did this on purpose, so that you can see how deep this shelf is. So when you're making art, you have to constantly ask yourself, is the person who's looking at it can figure out what it is you intended when you made it? And it's a tough thing to figure out. Sometimes people read completely different things into your work than you ever imagined, but that's okay. And sometimes whatever it is you were trying to say gets lost. And that part isn't okay. If it's really getting lost on your audience, you have to figure out what you need to do differently so that your intention comes across. So it's something I think about all the time, and that's where this came from. How well can you read me? It was more than words could say. We all have heard that old saying, a picture is worth, what? What?
1,000 words.
Yeah, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Yes, do you have a question?
Yes. Okay, so on the See What I Mean, you have the I Mean on a shelf that's holding up the See What.
Uh-huh.
For this artwork, it was is not being held up by the Could Say.
That's right.
Purpose for that?
Actually, there is a reason, and it just shows sometimes you don't think out everything you do ahead of time. First, the piece just said more than words could say. And I liked that. But as I started working on the other pieces, I decided I wanted all of the pieces in this series to be complete sentences. Because I teach writing, I'm always talking to students about writing complete sentences, and believe it or not, it's one of the hardest things to get students to do. So it's something that was in my head, and I decided for this series I wanted everything to have complete sentences, and more than words could say is just a phrase. So I added the it was afterwards. After stacking 3 even columns of early 20th century novels, I balanced a circular board on top, making a perfectly fine kitchen table. So this is sort of a metaphor for the art-making life. You fill your life with art and literature and meaning, and from that comes the practicalities of life. How you deal with the everyday aspects of having a home, making meals, having furniture, making friends, all the things that make your life worthwhile. For me, anyway, they all come from art and literature and music. So this is just a metaphor for that building process, for how to make a life that's meaningful. So this is the last one of that series. It's very tiny. It's about 12 inches high. Since I teach writing, I pay attention to sentences a lot. And I was interested in making as short a sentence as possible. So here we have just 2 words, that's that. The 2 words are almost identical. And it's a complete thought. Yes?
Since typeface has different personalities, I see a preference so far in a certain time. Do you have anything to add about why you chose what you did?
The typeface?
Uh-huh.
That's a good question, which I can answer with two different stories. Are most of you familiar with Jasper Johns? Okay, he started using stencils very early on in his art making career. And somebody once asked him if he used stencils because he likes them or because they come that way. And his answer was, I like that they come that way. In other words, he likes the found object aspect of stencils. So I love that idea. You know, you just go to the store and you buy them. But there are different kinds of stencils, and some of them I really don't like. So I made these with stencils that I looked for hard and long till I found stencils in a typeface that I liked. But I don't always use stencils. I also use my computer to generate type that I then transfer onto the paintings. And I've explored all different kinds of typefaces, and I don't like most of them, but I like really simple, gentle-looking typefaces with serifs. So not all the paintings are the same typeface, but they're all generally along those lines. So it looks a lot like a book, like the type you'd see in a book. I don't want it to be fancy, and I don't want the paintings to be about the typeface that I chose. I want it to look generic enough that you don't try to identify what the typeface is. Does that answer your question? So back in graduate school and continuing up through now, I've been studying the writing of Gertrude Stein, who was Gertrude Stein was an American writer who moved to Paris and wrote very, very avant-garde books. She was close friends with Picasso and the Cubists, and their ideas were very similar. Picasso was interested in, as he started his Cubist paintings, he was interested in looking at an object from different positions all at the same time, which is how you get all these figures where you can see the front of someone's face and the side of their face simultaneously. And Gertrude Stein was interested in the same thing, looking at the same person or incident or object many, many times all at once. And her writing reflected that. And she was also interested in all the aspects of what words are, what they look like on the page, what they sound like when you read them aloud, what they mean, and where they came from. So all those things go into her very abstract writing, and I'm totally fascinated, and she's been a huge influence on me. So I too like to look at words and say them out loud and hear what they sound like and consider all their meanings and permutations. So this was a piece about words, like words as objects. The paintings are very small. They're only about 12 inches square. But you can see they have these little frames on them, but each one is framed differently. Many years ago, I learned picture framing from the gentleman in the back there. And picture framing is a very, very precise thing, and it's a wonderful thing to learn how to do if you're making art. It comes in handy, even if you're not making flat paintings, it's a great thing to know how to do. And it involves precision up to like a 32nd of an inch. You have to know how to cut things and put them together. But I was thinking, there's no reason framing has to be so perfect. So when I framed these, I found wood on the street that somebody had thrown out. It had been the slats for a futon. And, whoops. And it's really rough wood that I painted white, but it's not, I didn't paint it very well. I painted it really loosely. And So the first one is framed just on this side. The second one is framed just on the top. And then each one has a frame it's framed a little bit more and more. So this one's framed on two sides. This one's framed on the left and the bottom. Until you get to the last one, it's framed all the way around. Yes?
So these canvases, they're white also.
Uh-huh.
Did you do the same technique of painting different layers of different colors underneath them also?
Yes.
So do you
So-
do that for all of the canvases that are white?
Mostly, yeah. Most of the time. So this one, you can tell, is indigo underneath. And I sanded it a lot. So first I painted them with really dense indigo blue paint. Sort of, I was looking for like the color that carbon paper used to be. Because it seemed to me that black words on white was really stark, but blue words on white was just a little more poetic, more gentle. So I've got close-ups of some of them. So I was trying to loosen up with the precision of the type. So I painted the words and then sanded them off and painted them again. So there's layers and layers of paint here. And the words look just less precise than some of the words I've used. So you can see where I sanded the paint off. So paint is a fascinating medium. I used to make sculpture because I like to do things with my hands, and then I realized you can do just as much with paint with your hands. It's an object just like any other object you work with. So you put it down in layers and you take stuff off and you can scratch into it. I have a friend who makes paintings out of acrylic paint, but there's no canvas underneath. They're just paint. So I haven't gone that far, but I do try to manipulate it a lot. So this is another series I did on shelves. Before I did the chalkboard series. But I was interested in the notion that words are objects, and I wanted the paintings to look like objects as much as the words are. So I made these little shelves. They're about 6 inches deep. And the paintings are also deep. They're on 4-inch thick stretchers. And they sit on these shelves just sort of like your dishes or your cups and saucers might sit on shelves in your kitchen. And it turned out to be a physics problem, trying to get the paintings to sit right on the shelves. They tended to fall off. So I had to figure out what I needed to do to get them to sit on there well. And I ended up putting weights on the bottom of them. And I had to tilt the shelf a little bit to get everything to work out.
Joan, you have a question?
Yes.
You bring in a lot of structure to your work, which isn't strange because you started in sculpture, but I'm just curious to, like, the wood shop aspect of your studio. Is that something you do in-house, or?
Yes. I decided quite a while ago that I didn't want to have to depend on anyone else to help me build the things I was making. So I had to learn how to make everything I wanted to make, and I couldn't make anything that was beyond my skill level. So I had to figure out what I liked making and what I didn't feel comfortable with. So like, I don't like forging, so I'm not going to make anything that I have to forge. But I do like woodworking. But I don't like power tools, which is difficult when you're woodworking. So I've got lots and lots of hand tools. I don't like the sound of power tools. That makes me really tense. I don't like knowing that I might lose a digit. You know, if I cut off one of my fingers, and friends of mine have done that, my career would be over. So, so I use power tools when I have to, but I really try to cut everything by hand and join it by hand. And learning how to make stretchers and picture frames has helped me figure out so many things. And every once in a while, I want to make something and I'm not quite sure how to make it work, and I'll call a friend who I think is really great at making things and ask for advice. But so many artists today don't make their own work. You know, they have ideas for things and then somebody else actually executes it. And I don't ever want to get to that point. I want to have control over everything.
Do you build your stretchers, like, use a miter box for that?
Uh-huh.
You cut all those corners by hand?
Uh-huh.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. I got this wonderful jigsaw, you know, that it's held in a little frame. You have to have a lot of muscles to make good art, you know. So I use that to make my angle cuts. And I've got, you saw in that first shot of my studio, I've got the corner brace. Anytime I have questions about different kinds of paint or materials, I either look it up or I ask people who know. I really like working in solitude. I don't like other people around. So I have my studio is my own. Nobody else shares it with me. And I don't like people to come visit me there, and I don't like anyone around. I really like to have my own space and my own solitude. So that means I have to make everything myself. So one of the many things I do for a living, since it's hard to make a living selling your artwork, is I edit. I worked for years at Microsoft as an editor of technical publications, and now I edit mostly art books. But a big issue in editing is word count. How many words are in an article, and where is it going to end up at the bottom of the page? So it's something that comes up all the time. So one of the issues in editing is dealing with the art department, because they're not so interested in word count. They want everything to fit exactly in the pages they've designated for whatever that article is that they're going to be publishing. And I was always arguing with the art department about the length of things. They would want something longer or shorter, and I would say, this is the length it is, you have to deal with it. So, in thinking about those arguments with the art department, it made me realize how much the words count. The words are so important. It's not just about the quantity, it's about what they are and what they say. So that's where this piece came from. Are we running out of time?
5-minute warning.
Okay. Words are fun. Lots of people are afraid of them because they think they're going to say something that they didn't intend, but you can have a great time with them. So I'm going to skip ahead since we have 5 minutes to this. So in 2009, I went with my husband to Marfa, Texas. Have any of you been there? Marfa is a little town in northern Texas where Donald Judd, the sculptor, lived. And there are 2 foundations there in his honor, the Judd Foundation and the Chinati Foundation. And they are, almost the entire town is about Donald Judd. And it's a fascinating artist community. But people there are totally oblivious to time. They're in the middle of Texas, there's nothing around them. There are a bunch of wonderful little businesses there, and they open and close at will. If they don't feel like coming into work that day, they just don't open. And nobody minds. Everybody's cool with this. So I was absolutely fascinated with the whole concept. Some nights there were no restaurants open because everybody had gone to a football game. So I started thinking about time. And Gertrude Stein wrote a lot about time. She was really interested in what she called the continuous present tense, that everything is happening now, and the present is always present. There's no past, there's no future, everything is now. So I started thinking about time and Marfa and how obsessed we are with time. And I made these little tiny drawings. This is only on 8-inch paper. And I cut the drawings into shapes because I was interested again in the notion of words and objects. But the important thing about these drawings is I made them with number 10 pencils, which is, if you're into drawing, you know, it's the hardest pencil you can get. And it takes hours and hours to make these because the first layer of drawing on there doesn't even show up. By the 4th or 5th layer of drawing, it starts to show up as you have layers and layers of this number 10 lead on the paper. And you have to do it really gently because since the lead is so hard, it will dig into the paper if you're not very careful. So I started making these, and I now have made hundreds of them. I've got books of them. I've got drawings in all different sizes, and I love the meditative quality of just sitting there with this pencil working on things. I carry little books with me everywhere I go with these drawings with these really hard pencils. So these are just 3 of them. This is the last one. It's 2 layers of paper, 2 drawings that were almost identical to one another. And I just put one on top of the other and then tore off half of the top layer. Because again, I was interested in this notion of the object, the word as object and the drawing as object. The drawing isn't just a flat surface where drawing is happening on, it's a piece of paper. So this is a direction I'm going to work on more, with more and more layers of paper with these subtle drawings on them. And this is the photo from the rooftop of my studio in Brooklyn. And you can see the Manhattan skyline. It's so inspiring to go out there. I try to go there every day up onto the roof to see what's happening in the city. And making art in New York is unlike making art anywhere else in the world. Everyone you come across in New York seems to be an artist. And it takes a huge amount of endurance to make art there. Space costs a fortune. And even if you have money, you have to find it. And that's not easy to do. So discussions of real estate come up all the time. Where are you working? Where'd you get a space? What neighborhood are you in? Where'd you get kicked out of? It's a constant discussion about where you're going to find a place to make your work. So having a space, and having a space that's all mine, is really, really special. And it's something I probably wouldn't have to deal with in any other city. So here's a shot from just last week of the skyline at sunset. Does anyone know what that building is? You should. This is the new World Trade Center, now the tallest building in the world. I got to watch it going up. So, we have another couple minutes? Okay, then I'll leave with a parting thought. You're just starting out on your careers, and you have the opportunity to experiment to your heart's desire and make whatever you want, because school is the opportunity where you can do that. there are no outside people telling you you can't do this and you can't do that. This is like your total freedom. And while you're here, you have to figure out like what drives you to make art. How are you going to keep doing it once you get out of school and nobody's giving you a grade and saying you did a good job? It's all going to have to come from inside. So you have to figure out what your direction is and where you want to go and what you want to do. And one of the ways to do that is to talk to lots and lots of other people who are out there trying to do it just like you. So embrace this opportunity.
Thank you.